Welcome to the second SOLA task for live sound. By now you will have already completed the first task, which is compression and effects, where you had to set up an external piece of hardware, namely a compressor and an effects unit, using both the insert points, auxiliary send and return. So you're familiar in some way with the console. Now, for the second task, your job is to specify the equipment for a PA system based on the lineup that's on Moodle, which I'll go through in a sec. Now, when you specify the equipment, it's not just a case of saying we need a mixing desk, front of house speakers, but actually justifying why you've chosen that piece of equipment. Why is it, good quality? What features does the equipment have? How does it actually facilitate the lineup? Now, the lineup is an acoustic drum kit, so all elements of that mic'd up, an electric guitar with an amp, so the amp will need micing up and they provide backing vocals. A bass guitar with no amp, so they're going to need some form of DI. A keyboard player, which DI from the keyboard, and they provide backing vocals. A three-piece brass section, so two trumpets and a tuba, so mics suitable for those applications, and a lead vocalist. Now, starting with the mixing console, this is the Allen & Heath GL2400. It's a 16 channel console, so there are 16 mono channels, 4 groups, and your main left and right out, and a mono out as well. So this desk would be described as a 16-4-2. 16 mono channels, 4 groups, and your stereo output. Okay. Each of the channels has both a mic and a line input, XLR socket for mics, and the jack for line level sources. There's phantom power for condenser microphones, DI boxes. Polarity switch if you do need to invert the polarity, maybe your mic and a snare from the top and bottom. And if you're using the line input on the console, you need to make sure that you activate the line input by pressing the line button. Okay. There's a gain control to set the level into the console, and also a high pass filter, allowing the high frequencies to pass through and cutting frequencies below 100 Hz, which is good for things like mic handling noise, if there's any rumbling and stage noise, things like that. Okay. The console's got a 4-band parametric EQ, so high frequency, high mid, and low. The high frequency and low frequency are shelving EQs, so that means that the frequency is set. The high frequency is just a gain control, adding or taking away gain from 12 kHz and above. The low frequency, adding and taking away gain from 80 Hz and below. Now, the high mid and low mid are both sweepable EQs, so the green, obviously blue for gain, the green controls are for frequency. So with a high and low mid, like I say, you can cut or boost with the gain, but you can also sweep through the frequencies to either find a sweet spot in the sound, or maybe there's a problem there and you want to try and actually cut that out. The low mid sweeps from 35 Hz all the way up to 1K, and the high mid from 500 all the way up to 15K. To use the EQ on any channel, you need to press EQ in to actually activate that EQ. So don't stand there, tinkering around with the EQ, wondering why it's not working if you've not actually activated it. Now, because this is a live console, and one of the main focuses is to ensure that the band can hear themselves on stage, and with such a large lineup for your, this task, whole drum kit, electric guitar, bass guitar, keyboard, 3-piece brass, vocals, you're going to need more than one independent monitor mix. Now, this console actually has 6 auxiliary sends. They're actually split off into 2 clear sections here. Aux 1 to 4 we would normally assign to on-stage monitor mixes. Okay. And 1, 2, 3 and 4 can also be set pre or post fade. We would normally set monitor mixes to pre-fade, so that if we turned up the level during a mix, it wouldn't affect the output from our auxiliaries. Because we don't want, if the guitarist's solo's coming up, we might not want to turn it up in the PA and also then boost it in the monitors, because you might find that it then overpowers what the band are hearing. There might be some confusion. Aux 5 and 6, you can see they're nicely colour coded. 5 and 6 can also be selected as pre or post fade, and we would normally assign those to aux sends for effects. Okay, and again, we probably have those post fade, because we might want to, as we turn up certain instruments and sound sources within the mix, we'd probably want that to also send more level to the effects units, so more effect is applied to the sound. All channels have got pan to set where in the stereo field the sound is, left to right, and a mute facility so you can mute off the tracks. There's a PFL function, which is pre-fade listen. It enables you to monitor the signal coming into the console on both your master meters, and if you're using headphones, it operates as a solo facility so that you can listen to that particular channel through the headphones. You know, if there's a problem on stage and there's a bit of a buzz coming from the bass guitar, you might want to solo or PFL that track so you can actually then listen to it, treat it with EQ, so on and so forth. Okay. Every channel has independent metering, so you can see the level coming into the desk on all channels. There's routing for each channel as well, so we can route the channel to the main left and right bus straight out the PA, or we can route it firstly to a group. Maybe we want to route several tracks, maybe the drum tracks, all to groups 1 and 2, so that the overall level of the drums can be adjusted through groups rather than independent channels. Okay. And obviously groups 1 and 2 or 3 and 4. You can do them individually as well. If you wanted to work in mono, you'd route it to groups 1 and 2, but pan left for odd, pan right for even. Okay. If you are using groups, make sure left and right isn't pressed as well as your group, because if it is, you'll hear both here and here the signal. You don't want that. Take left and right off and just route to your groups first, and then from your groups here you then link on route to the master output. Okay, so you're creating a bit of a signal chain there. Okay. Now your groups all have independent metering again. They also have pan, so if you wanted to pan hard left and hard rights for groups 1 and 2 to create a wide stereo feel. They've obviously got mute, so you can mute out your groups. And they have AFL, which stands for after fade listen. If you wanted to actually monitor what your groups are doing in your headphones, you could do that here, so you could listen to the whole drum kit and maybe apply compression to the group, maybe just reverb to the whole of a group. You know, if it was all backing vocalists and you wanted to apply reverb to those, send them to a group, and then on the back of the console, patch in on the group inserts for your effects or compression, whichever it may be. Right, obviously we've got the master faders going to your main PA system and a mono output as well. Okay. You've also got on the console in this section here your master auxiliaries. So your master auxiliary sends. These are your channel auxiliaries. So if we wanted all the drum kit, we'd turn up auxiliary 1 and master auxiliary. And again, if you're over here engineering and you want to hear what the band are hearing through your headphones, there's an AFL feature on the auxiliaries, so you can actually monitor in your headphones what the band are also hearing through their mix, so you can get to know their mix from down here in the engineer's perspective. There's a matrix on here, which is like a shorthand mixer, so you can send all the groups to a matrix and pass that on to maybe a video camera feed, something like that. There's a talkback mic to save using a channel here, and also there is an oscillator, so you can either put a 1 kilohertz tone through the system or pink noise, which we're going to talk about shortly. One last thing to add is that channels 15 and 16 can both be either mono channels or they can operate as stereo channels. So you can see there's not just one gain pot, there's 3 here. Okay, so you can have multiple input sources onto this channel. It has got a limited EQ, okay, 4 set EQs rather than sweepable like these channels. Okay, just to talk about the back of the mixing console. As said, every mono channel has both a mic input with an XLR, a line input for line level sources. Every channel has an insert point where we'd use a Y cable to hook up an external processor, such as a noise gate or a compressor. The Y lead, one end acts as the send into the compressor, one end acts as a return, coming out and back in, so it creates a send and return loop. And every channel has a direct out, so if you were using a multi-track recorder, you could take the line straight out of each channel into the recorder to capture a multi-track performance. 15 and 16, as we said, can be used as the mono channel with a mic there, and also stereo channels here, so you've got alternative inputs there. Okay. Over this section here is your main left and right output. These are XLRs, okay. And your mono again, XLR, which would probably feed for a sub. You've also got your auxiliary sends. The outputs are here, the physical outs, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. And you've got your group inserts over here as well. Okay. Now, remember, you've got to make sure your equipment facilitates the setup of the band. So has this console got enough channels? Has it got enough auxiliaries? Is the EQ flexible enough for you? Now, to get the signal from the console to the PA system, the simplest way would be the XLR left and right out to a power amp and feed that onto your front of house speakers. And that will give you the sound for the audience. The other way, for the band, you know, the monitor feed would be from your auxiliaries. So auxiliary out here into an amp, then onto your monitors. Okay. In this setup though, we do use a graphic EQ. So we take out of the main left and right output and into a graphic equalizer. Over here in the rack, as discussed, is the graphic equalizer. Now that's the main outputs of the desk feeding into here, and then the main left and right output of the graphic equalizer feeds down the multicore to the stage box. Mixing desk to graphic, graphic EQ down the multicore to the stage box. Now we have a graphic equalizer in the system because we can actually, as said about the console, we can output pink noise. Now pink noise is equal energy across all octaves. So it's just a loud noise, but you can actually hear the hissing in all frequency octaves. So you've got, you know, all the way through the frequency spectrum. And it's an equal, softer sound. Now, the reason we do this is we can actually use an analyzer. You can either use a hardware version like this, there are software versions that you can run off a laptop, and you need a calibrated mic, so a super flat frequency response mic that you would then use to analyze the sound that's being picked up from the room. So the PA outputs the pink noise, and if there are any particular issues with the room, maybe certain frequencies are building up in the space, the analyzer will show this, and using the graphic EQ we can actually flatten off the response of the PA system. Now we do that to calibrate it so that no matter what space we work in, you know, in the voice box, move it into a venue for instance, we can calibrate the PA every time to make sure that, you know, it operates fairly similarly, so we're used to how it works. Obviously, if you want effects as part of your setup, for vocals, you've got a lead vocalist there, backing vocalists, you'll need to make sure that you specify an effects unit. Here we've got a Zoom, it's not a great one, there are many better ones out there. To hook this up, we'd use one of our auxiliary sends, so one of the, you know, auxiliary 5 or 6, out of the physical output into the effects unit, and then we'd return the output of the effects unit to a spare channel on the console, so we can then bring that reverb or effects through the PA system. And because all the channels have auxiliary sends, the return from the effects unit could also be sent to the monitors on the stage, so the vocalist could have the reverb in his or her monitor, as well as us as engineers having that reverb through the main PA. One of the other pieces of equipment that you'll want is most likely a compressor. So the compressor's job is to, you know, reduce the dynamic range, smooth off any loud peaks in the song. You hook one of those up using your insert points. So the Y lead that we talked about a second ago. Okay, make sure you identify which channels you'll need compression on. Maybe the kick, the snare, maybe bass guitar, maybe as a group on your vocals. So you want to make sure that you've got enough of those within your system as well. Don't forget, The system won't work if you don't have leads, so have you specified enough jack leads, XLR leads, insert leads, just to facilitate this equipment so far? I suppose the next question is, now we've hooked up the main output of the mixing desk into the graphic EQ, we've also hooked up, auxiliary send to effects unit and return to a spare channel and insert points for compression, etc. How do we get this signal from the mixer down there to the stage? Now for that you're going to want to specify a multicore or a snake. Now you can see here all we've got is 16 XLRs which all plug into the mic inputs of the channels, and there's 4 jack leads as well. So this is 16 mic, 4 jack, and they're labelled A, B, C and D. Now as we said in this setup, it's the main output of the desk, so left and right XLR into the graphic EQ. The output of the graphic EQs, we're going to use the jacks, so we plug A and B in there using the multicore. Again, this is ideal because you need to work out how many channels you need for that band on Moodle, and there's 16 available signals here, and there's 4 sends. So you need to think, is this enough? Is it not enough? Okay, and here is the other end of the multicore, the stage box. As you can see, there's 16 XLR sockets and 4 jack sockets as well. So any sources from the stage that you're going to be, using, mics for the drum kits, so on and so forth, will all go in here, and they'll all feed up to the PA system where you plug the other end of the multicore into the mixing console. This is one of the other multi-cores that we have in the college. As you can see, this one's a lot larger. It comes on a drum, which you can reel off as much of the multi-core as you need. This one has 32 lines for XLRs and 4 XLRs here for your A, B, C and D. So again, your master sends, auxiliaries, etc, etc. This one obviously will cost more than the first one, but this one, is more portable and has got more channels. Okay, perhaps one of the most important buys for the PA system are going to be your power amplifiers. Now, in our PA system here, we're running 2. The Yamaha here, which is the P3500S, which is 2 channels, 500 watts per channel at 4 ohms. So it's quite a powerful amplifier. And also the PV at the top here, the PV1500, which again is, I think it's about 450 watts per channel at 4 ohms. Now one of the things you're going to want to consider is, the amplifiers need to be powerful enough. You've got an acoustic drum kit on the stage, plus a whole host of other backline things going on. Your amplifiers need to be powerful enough to drive the speakers, to make sure that the PA is loud enough to cut across the top of the drum kit, and it can feed enough power to the stage monitors. Now, realistically, you're looking for at least 300 watts per side. So each of the front of house speakers wants at least 300 watts. I stated this 4 ohms. Now, ohms is the impedance. That's the resistance to electricity. Your front of house speakers might be 500 watts at 4 ohms. So ideally, your amplifier wants to be able to provide 2 channels of 500 watts at 4 ohms. You will find though that if you drop the ohms to 8 ohms, your amplifier will vary greatly, and you'll probably only be able to provide about 250 watts on the same amplifier. This one could do 500 watts at 4 ohms, but probably only about 250 watts at 8 ohms. So you'll get considerably less power out of the amp if you put 8 ohm speakers onto it rather than 4 ohms. Invariably, 4 ohm speakers cost more money. 8 ohms are cheaper. They're cheaper to build, so on and so forth. They cost less money. You might find, a wicked pair of speakers that are 600 watts at 8 ohms, but to find an amplifier that can provide 600 watts at 8 ohms is going to cost considerably more money. So make sure, whichever speakers and amp combinations you buy, the impedance matches, so the 4 ohm speakers, 4 ohms amp, and make sure that the power ratings are more than enough and they at least match. Okay, you don't want to be using a 100 watt amplifier on a 500 watt pair of speakers, because you're going to be driving the amp so hard, you know, full blast, just to get enough power to get the speakers going. It's always advisable to have more power from your amplifier than is required, because then you don't need to drive the amplifier as hard to get the full efficiency out of the loudspeaker. Okay, so this one again is 2 channels, 500 watts at 4 ohms per channel. This one is 450 watts at 4 ohms per channel. Now, this power amplifier we use for front of house, so this feeds the main left and right speaker for the audience. And this one here, because it's 2 channels, A and B, we can feed 2 separate monitors. So in this setup we could use auxiliary 1 to this channel to feed 1 monitor send, and auxiliary 2 on the console to this input to feed a different monitor send altogether. It could be the drummer wants, you know, bass guitar and snare here, but on this channel the vocalist wants vocals and guitar, so you can do that. If you are saying that you need more than 2 independent monitor mixes, you're going to need another amp. This can only do 2 channels. Okay. In this PA system there is a subwoofer, you know, a sub that provides frequencies of 120 Hz and below, and that's all that it outputs, the very, very low frequencies. Now, why do we want a sub? Why do we want something that can provide the very low end? Looking at your lineup, you've got a drum kit with a kick drum, so you're going to want extra power from that, but also your bass guitarist does not use an amplifier, so there's no backline, there's no on-stage sound coming from the bass player at all. So our PA system is really going to have to provide all the low-end energy that's required. So think about whether your system needs a sub at all, justify it of course, and make sure it's powerful enough. Now these are the front of house speakers. These are called loudspeakers. Obviously they're designed to push, you know, high SPLs, high sound pressure levels out into the venue or space. They've got a 15-inch low frequency driver, so that is designed so that it will output high SPLs, and because it's a larger driver, it'll have a greater low end output, so you'll get better low frequency response from the actual loudspeaker. Okay, they come in a range of sizes, 12-inch, 15, you know, some of the mega ones are 18 inches, but you generally find that they're in subs. And you've got a high frequency driver as well. Okay, so it's a standard 2-way system, low and high. Now these are quoted, take the speak on out, at 350 watts RMS. Okay, so your RMS figure is the one to go for. Ignore, you know, program or continual or PMPO. RMS is the figure to look for. And the impedance is 4 ohms. So looking at our amplifier, we need an amplifier that has 2 channels of at least 350 watts of power at 4 ohms. Otherwise, we're going to be driving our amplifier really hard. Okay. Ideally, this is something you want to look at, you know, for your PA system. You won't find the HiSys anymore. They're quite an old speaker, but have a look. The other consideration is this is a passive speaker, meaning no amplifier is built in, so it requires a separate amplifier. You may well want to go down the route of providing an active PA system where the amplifier is built within. You'll find it costs more money just as a single unit, but it does mean that the amplifier is matched to the speaker, the impedance is matched to the speaker, it's all in one case, it's more portable, it's easier to set up, you don't need all the extra cables and leads and setting of levels, so on and so forth. So consider, will your PA system be active or passive? And down here we have our monitors. Again, like the front of house speakers, this is a passive speaker, so it requires an amplifier. You know, this is kind of the standard size you would want for a full band. It's a 15-inch driver, so it's going to have a very, you know, big throw. It's going to be loud. It's going to have good low frequency response, and also it's got, you know, it's 2-way, low frequency, high frequency. Because of the size, it's going to have quite a wide coverage of sound as well. so you know that you don't have to stand directly in front of the speaker. You could be slightly off axis and still get good sound reproduction from it. Now these are 4 ohms, 300 watts, hence why the PV amplifier is 450 watts at 4 ohms per channel. So we know we can run 2 independent monitor mixes from that one amplifier. Now the only thing that really is left for me to talk about is, mics. Make sure they're appropriate for the task. What is it that the mic's being used for? Vocals, instruments, overheads are probably going to be condensers. Make sure you've specified DI boxes for any instruments that have line level outs. Have you got a mic stand for everything? An XLR cable, jack cables? Have you got all of the cables necessary to connect up the PA system? Okay, the XLRs from the mixing desk to the graphic equalizer. Have you got jacks from the stage box down there to your amplifiers? Have you got speak-on cables from your amplifiers to your monitors and your front of house speakers? If there's any budget, think about cases for equipment. If there's any budget left, think about cases for equipment, leads for power, 4-way power leads, things like that, extension cables and so on and so forth. Make sure, spare kettle leads, spare leads as well. It's always a good idea to invest in more leads than are required. Just make sure that you've been through the checklist, because if there are pieces of equipment missing, the PA system won't work and you won't pass.